Today, we're diving into the life and work of Arthur Miller. And look, he wasn't just one of America's greatest playwrights. You could argue he was a moral compass for a nation that was kind of losing its way. So let me just start with a question for you. It's a tough one, but it's really at the heart of our story today. What happens when your loyalty to your country seems to clash with your loyalty to your own conscience? Because you see, for Arthur Miller, this wasn't some abstract idea. It was the central conflict of his entire life, and he managed to turn that personal struggle into some of the most powerful plays ever written.
To really get Miller, we've got to go back to the beginning, back to a time of huge national chaos that would pretty much define his whole worldview.
Miller actually started his life in a pretty well-off family in New York. But then the stock market crashed. He literally watched his father's business collapse and saw right in front of his eyes how fast a successful life could just disappear. That experience, seeing the system completely fail the individual, that became the engine for all of his writing. I mean, he grew up surrounded by this really powerful myth of the American dream, right? This idea that if you just work hard enough, you're guaranteed to succeed. But what he was seeing on the streets told a completely different story. And this just captures the central conflict in his early stuff perfectly. On one side, you've got the promise of the American dream. And on the other, the brutal reality he saw every day. Good, decent, hardworking people getting totally crushed by forces way beyond their control. This whole conflict just explodes onto the stage in 1949 with Death of a Salesman. The play's hero, this guy, Willy Loman, has built his entire life, his whole identity, on that promise. But the play just rips it apart, showing us how that ideal poisons his family and pushes him into delusion as he realizes his whole life's work has basically come to nothing. And wow, the play was an absolute sensation. It won a Pulitzer Prize, and it cemented Miller's reputation as this major voice in American theater. But just as he was taking on the American dream, an even bigger threat to American identity was brewing. And this one was going to test his own conscience. Okay, so let's jump forward to the 1950s. This was a time of intense paranoia and fear, and it would inspire Miller's next great masterpiece and put him on a collision course with the U.S. government. This was the era of the Red Scare. A massive fear of communism led to government investigations, blacklists. There was just this immense pressure on artists and thinkers to prove their loyalty. Now, here's where Miller's genius really kicks in. He sees a historical parallel. He looks at the political panic of his own time, and he sees this chilling echo of the Salem witch trials from way back in 1692. In both cases, you have a community being torn apart by fear, by accusations, and by this incredible pressure to name names. And that insight, that became the foundation for The Crucible. By writing about the witch trials, he created this incredible allegory, a way to talk about the political witch hunts of the 1950s without ever even having to mention communism. It was just a brilliant and frankly, a very brave thing to do. And then, in this totally wild turn of events, the exact themes Miller was writing about on stage became the reality of his own life. So Miller himself gets called to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee. And just like in the witch trials, he's pressured to name other people who might have been involved in left-leaning political groups. He had a choice, save himself or protect his friends. And he refused to name a single person. In that moment, Miller pretty much became John Proctor, the hero of his own play. I mean, just like Proctor chooses to die rather than sign a false confession, Miller risked his career and his freedom to protect his integrity and to protect his colleagues. And the consequences were serious. He was convicted of contempt of Congress. Now, that conviction was eventually overturned, but the message it sent was loud and clear. Standing up to power comes with a very heavy price. And as if all that wasn't enough, just as his political stand was making headlines, his personal life just exploded. His marriage in 1956 to the superstar Marilyn Monroe made him one of the most famous writers on the planet. And that put his work and his defiance under an even more intense spotlight. So all these decades later, why do we still perform and study Arthur Miller? What is it about his work that feels so timeless? Well, first, his body of work is just staggering.
You've got the wartime secrets in All My Sons, the tragedy of Willy Loman in Death of a Salesman, the powerful allegory of the Crucible, and the simmering family tensions in A View from the Bridge. These plays really defined a whole generation of American theater.
But what really gives these plays their staying power are the huge universal questions at their core. He's always asking us to look at our own lives. What's our responsibility to other people? What happens when we betray the truth? And what does it take for one person to stand up against the crushing weight of society? I mean, these questions are just as relevant today as they were back then. You see, for Miller, theater wasn't just an escape for a couple of hours. He believed a great play should make you a little uncomfortable. It should make you question what you believe, and you should leave the theater a little different than when you walked in. And maybe this is his most important message of all. In both his life and his work, Arthur Miller showed us that true courage isn't always some big, loud, heroic act. Sometimes the bravest thing you can possibly do is to just quietly but firmly refuse to participate in a lie. And that brings us right back to our opening question. Miller's work really challenges us to look at our own world. A world of social media, political division, and this constant pressure to conform, and ask ourselves, what is the value of a private conscience? That's a question he believed was always, always worth asking.